The first truck arrived before sunrise. Its headlights cut across Ethan Carter's soybean field like search beams, bouncing over rows that had taken months to shape. He stood on the porch of the farmhouse, coffee still in hand, trying to understand why a gravel hauler was crossing his access road. Then a second truck came, then a third. By the time he pulled on his boots and reached the gate, the first load was already tipping. Tons of gray boulders thundered onto the edge of his field. "What the hell are you doing?" Ethan shouted. The driver didn't answer. He just pointed toward another truck and shrugged, like this was someone else's problem. Dust rose in the pale morning air. Another load dropped. Then another. By 8 o'clock, a ridge of blasted rock stretched nearly 200 yards across Ethan's lower field. He found the site foreman leaning against a pickup, clipboard in hand. "You've got the wrong property." The foreman barely looked up. "Nope. This is Carter land. According to our easement map, spoil storage area extends to this line." He tapped a paper. Ethan grabbed it and looked. The map showed a faded property boundary and a shaded zone extending into his land. "This line is wrong. Take it up with the company. You're dumping on planted ground." The foreman finally met his eyes. "Then you should move your crop." By noon, Ethan had called the county, the sheriff, and a lawyer who promised to review options. None of it stopped the trucks. For 3 days they came, load after load. Rock blasted from the nearby mining expansion piled across 12 acres of his most workable ground. Some boulders were the size of refrigerators. Others came in heaps of broken limestone and shale. When the convoy finally stopped, the field looked like a quarry. Neighbors drove by slowly. Some shook their heads. Some stared. Dale Harper parked by the fence and climbed out. "They did this all on paper?" Ethan nodded. Dale kicked a loose stone. "You been a Sioux?" "Trying." Dale looked over the endless mounds. "That'll take years." "I know. And what are you farming in the meantime?" Ethan didn't answer, because that was the real question. The lower field had always mattered. It drained well, planted early, and yielded better than the higher ground in dry years. Losing it wasn't symbolic. It was expensive. That night, the kitchen table filled with maps, letters, and estimates. Mara set down dinner no one touched. "The attorney says injunction first," Ethan said. Walter Carter, his father, read the easement copy again. "This survey line was redrawn 20 years ago. Can we prove it?" Walter sighed. "Maybe." Mara looked at Ethan. "And while maybe is happening," he stared through the window toward the dark field. "I don't know." Walter folded the paper carefully. "When I was a kid," he said, "your grandfather had a saying." Ethan didn't look up. "Not now, Dad." Walter continued anyway. "When someone hands you a burden, make them regret how useful it became." Mara smiled faintly. Ethan didn't. Not yet. The next week was worse. Rain fell twice, washing dust and smaller rock into the rows below. Insurance said contamination reviews were needed. Seed reps offered sympathy. Bills offered none. At the feed store, conversation stopped when Ethan entered, then restarted louder after he passed. "He's finished on that south ground. Can't move that much rock. Even if he wins, land's ruined." Dale found him near the mineral blocks. "You heard of mobile crushers?" Ethan glanced up. "For quarry work." "Yeah." "Why?" Dale shrugged. "Because suing a pile doesn't remove it." That night, Ethan sat in the machine shed staring at the mounds beyond the yard light. Gray shapes rose like hills where rows should have been. Mara stepped in carrying coffee. "You've been out here an hour." "I'm thinking. That usually means dangerous things." He almost smiled. "What if I don't move it?" She waited. "What if I use it?" She looked toward the field. "As what?" "I don't know yet." The next morning, he drove to 3 counties. By sunset, he had spoken to quarry operators, road crews, and a retired agronomist who laughed for 30 seconds before turning serious. "Depends what kind of stone," the old man said. "Limestone can help. Shale less so. Particle size matters. Soil pH matters. Blend matters. So if I crush it, if it's mostly AG lime-grade calcium stone, you may be standing on fertilizer." Ethan leaned forward. "And if it isn't? Then you're standing on expensive gravel." That was enough hope to keep moving. He hired a lab. Samples were taken from 6 piles. He rented, at painful cost, a mobile jaw crusher for 1 week with operator option, then canceled the operator and learned it himself to save money. Walter watched the machine unload. "You know how to run that?" "No." Comforting. The crusher was ugly, loud, and hungry. Conveyor belts. Steel jaws. Diesel appetite. The first boulder went in slow, then disappeared into the machine with a violent crack. Crushed stone poured from the conveyor in grated stream like gray grain. Dale, who had come only to watch failure, stepped back. "Well," he said, "that's something." For 6 days, Ethan worked from dawn past dark. Loader in one hand, crusher in the other. Fuel bills stacked fast, but so did processed material. The lab results arrived on day 4. High calcium carbonate, low contaminants, usable magnesium trace, mostly limestone. Mara read the report twice. "Is this good?" Ethan looked up, covered in dust. "This is very good." Walter took off his glasses. "You're telling me they dumped lime on our field?" "Looks like it." He laughed so hard he had to sit down. By the second week, the rock hills had become windrows of crushed amendments spread across damaged acres. Ethan borrowed a buggy spreader, calibrated rates, and blended the material into the topsoil with discs and vertical tillage. Neighbors lined the road to watch. Some mocked, some measured quietly. Dale stood longest. "You really think this grows anything?" Ethan killed the engine and climbed down. "I think next season answers louder than I do." Dale folded his arms. "And if it fails?" Ethan looked across the gray-brown field. "Then I was already losing 12 acres. That ended the conversation. Winter came early. Snow covered the treated ground before anyone knew what would happen. Lawsuits moved slowly. The mining company denied wrongdoing and blamed historical maps. None of it mattered until spring. When FAO finally released the fields, Ethan walked the lower ground alone. The soil crumbled differently under his boots. Looser, sweeter smelling, less sour than before. He knelt and squeezed a handful, then smiled for the first time in months. Because beneath the snow, something had changed. And if he was right, the company hadn't buried his field. They had rebuilt it. Spring planting came with more eyes than usual. Word had spread through 3 counties that Ethan Carter was about to seed 12 acres of what used to be a rock pile. Some came to help. Most came to watch. Dale Harper arrived first, leaning against his truck with coffee in hand. "You still have time to leave it fallow," he said. Ethan adjusted the planter chains. "You still have time to stop talking." Dale smirked. "That's the spirit." The lower field looked different now. The jagged mounds were gone. In their place lay dark soil blended with pale crushed limestone, worked smooth through months of tillage and freeze-thaw. It wasn't pretty, but it was ready. Walter Carter stood at the fence line, hands in his pockets. "Seed depth matters more here," he said. "I know. Population too. I know." Walter nodded once. "Good. Then I can worry quietly." Ethan started planting just after sunrise. Pass by pass, the rows went in straight across land everyone had written off. The planter rode smoother than expected. Moisture held evenly. The soil closed cleanly over the seed. Dale walked beside one pass, scooping dirt with his boot. "I hate saying this," he muttered, "but this feels nice." Ethan grinned faintly. "Say it louder. Don't push it." The first sign came 2 weeks later. Emergence. The lower field greened up faster than the neighboring ground. Uniform stands rose in near-perfect spacing. Where some higher acres showed patchy yellowing from spring stress, the reclaimed field stayed vigorous. Rick Harlow drove by and stopped at the gate. "That yours?" Ethan looked over the rows. "Last I checked." Rick frowned. "Looks stronger than your North 80. "It is." Rick stared longer. "That shouldn't happen." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe it should." By June, there was no denying it. The corn on the rebuilt ground stood taller, darker, and thicker stalked than anything else on the farm. Soil tests confirmed pH correction, better calcium levels, and improved nutrient availability. Years of subtle acidity had been limiting yield more than Ethan knew. The company's waste had become amendment. The field they buried had become the best field he owned. Neighbors who had laughed now arrived with questions. "What spread rate did you use? How fine was the crush? You got more of that stone?" Dale came most often, pretending he was just passing through. One afternoon he stood at the edge of shoulder-high corn and shook his head. "I said it'd fail." "You did." "I also said you were crazy." "You did." Dale kicked the dirt. "Still might be." Ethan laughed. The lawsuit dragged on through summer. Mining attorneys argued easement ambiguity, no measurable damages, beneficial material placement, and lack of permanent harm. That last phrase made Ethan smile every time he heard it. Because now they were trying to prove they had helped him. Claire Donnelly visited the farm in July to gather updated evidence. She walked into the field, corn leaves brushing her shoulders. This is the disputed acreage? All 12 acres. She looked around slowly. You understand this complicates damages. How? If they harmed you, then increased your yield, courts start asking strange questions. Walter, standing nearby, chuckled. Best problem we've had all year. Claire smiled despite herself. We may shift strategy. To what? Unauthorized dumping, trespass, cleanup costs, loss of use during season, and unjust enrichment through using your land as disposal. Ethan nodded. Do that. Harvest arrived under clear skies. The combine rolled into the lower field first. Not for sentiment. For proof. Dale and half the township gathered along the road again, this time without pretending they were headed somewhere else. Walter climbed into the buddy's seat. You nervous? Yes. Good. Means it matters. The header dropped. Rose vanished into the machine. Yield numbers flashed on the monitor. Ethan stared, then recalibrated, then stared again. Walter leaned closer. Well, Ethan swallowed. It's wrong. The next pass came in higher. Then the next. And the next. Walter slapped the armrest. It's not wrong. The monitor showed yields roughly double his farm average on that section. By the time they finished the first quarter, projections were clear. Not just better. Far beyond better. When all 12 acres were weighed against prior historical averages, the reclaimed ground had effectively doubled production there. And because improved cash flow funded better inputs elsewhere, whole farm output surged dramatically. By season's end, Ethan's total harvested bushels were nearly twice what they would have been without that field's turnaround and follow-on improvements. At the feed store, nobody argued the numbers. They just asked how. Winter hearings ended with settlement talks. The mining company wanted confidentiality. Ethan wanted boundary correction, compensation for lost season destruction, legal fees, and written access restrictions forever. They agreed faster than expected. Turns out public trials about dumping rock on farmland weren't good for corporate image. The next spring, Ethan stood where the first truck had tipped its load. Now the ground was level, planted, and alive. Mara joined him, hands in jacket pockets against the wind. You ever think about thanking them? She asked. He looked at the field stretching green beneath morning light. No. Why not? Because they meant to bury me. She smiled. And instead, he bent, grabbed a handful of rich dark soil threaded with pale limestone flecks, and let it fall through his fingers. They paid to fix what I didn't know was broken. Dale drove past slowly, rolled down his window, and shouted across the fence. You got room for another pile? Ethan laughed. Only if you're paying tipping fees. The truck moved on. Wind crossed the rows. 12 ruined acres had become the strongest ground on the farm. The mining company dumped boulders on his field. He crushed them into soil. And from then on, whenever people talked about that season, they stopped calling it damage. They called it the year bad luck planted the best crop Ethan Carter ever grew.